there's now been announced a men's health strategy. So what are your hopes for that?
Well, it's still very, very early days. It was only announced 2 or 3 weeks ago, but you're very right. Wes Streeting, the Minister of Health in the UK, has announced a much needed men's health strategy. I'm sure you know men's health in the UK is behind women's in more or less every metric you can think of. And although we've had a much needed strategy for women's health, we've never had one for men's health until now. So it's been announced. We don't know what it sounds like. I know there are lots of meetings all over London between various different men's health charities and organisations and individuals trying to work out what it looks like, and hopefully, I don't know, the right people in those rooms. So it's very thin on detail, as it normally is, but we don't quite know. But we do know that in the UK, for example, 15 men die young every single hour, and most of those deaths are avoidable. We do know that men die more by, like I said, more or less every single cause of death, and die more often at every single age. So it's definitely a much needed strategy and one more step closer to where we want to be.
Who gets round that table? Do you know sort of what sort of people are getting round
Well,
that table?
it's a contentious one. I mean, I'm a bit of a birdcage rattler, as you might know, but Movember are the organisation that are leading it. They're the ones that seem to be at the head of the table. And then invited to the table are lots of different smaller charities like We Are Survivors, the Men and Boys Coalition, Mankind, Man Up, each of them sort of lending their own insights. But yeah, it seems to be by invitation only. I don't know who's sending those invites out. I don't want an invite. I've not been invited. I think it'd be a really bad idea if I was invited, because I just think I'd rock the boat too much. And I think there's some people that wouldn't want me there. But I'm questioning why Movember are leading it, if I'm honest, if I want to get down to it. I don't know why Movember are leading it. They are not a British charity. They have no British trustees. They're not based in the UK. They're not from the UK. And they arrived late. They arrived late to the party, and they are guests to the party. The people that I'm talking about, like the Men and Boys Coalition, they've been banging the drum for the men's health strategy at years before Movember arrived. So and they're a British charity run by British trustees. So I'd prefer to see someone like that running, sat at the head of the table rather than Movember. But it's better than nothing, and nothing is what we had 6 months ago. So it's still progress.
I think Movember sort of are the kind of the celebrity that kind of get invited based on status, and actually it's what are they actually doing? Because I've heard you talk about Movember, and I know your thoughts on it, and I think I even questioned when I was listening to you talk about it. I really thought, what are they actually doing? What does the charity do other than November becoming Movember? I don't really know too much out of what the functioning of Movember is and what they actually do. That's something that I actually ended up questioning myself, because I've been around sport, as you know, and that it's huge, a huge thing in sport. And I've spent a lot of time playing cricket in Australia. So is every November those Mo's come out and just the tash is everywhere, and you know who's supporting it. But I also now think when it comes down to, if you ask the average Joe who is doing it and trying to support the cause, so like, what is it doing? And they'll just say men's health, prostate cancer. Like, they'll just reel off some things. You go, yeah, but where does that money go? What does it do? What's the function of it? And do you know how have you seen anyone's life change through that working? So yeah, it's an interesting one.
I think it's fair. I mean, it must be said they do something. They don't do enough.
Yes, yeah, they're not doing nothing.
They don't do enough, anywhere near enough, in my opinion. But they do good work. They don't do anything directly themselves. They basically collect money. They're a fundraising organisation, and then they'll distribute money to various different organisations, charities, people like yourself, like cricketers who if you wanted to run a men's group to teach all young boys how to play cricket in your local town, you'd go to Movember, cap in hand, and they would give you £1,000. My issue with Movember is that they're not spending that money anywhere near as fast as they're receiving it. Like you said, they're the first word out of people's mouths when it comes to men's health. And, for every £1 that's donated to Men's Health, about 95 pence of that are going to go to Movember. So the lion's share doesn't even begin to describe how much money they get. And the problem is the money they receive is not being spent. So you can see how much money they've got. It's all publicly available on the Charity Commission website. And they have about £50 million. It's probably the best way of saying it, £50 million. And I don't want to get too far into the nuts and bolts of how the ethics of how a charity runs, but basically a charity needs to work out how much money can we spend on charitable activities. If you're British Cancer Research UK, you want to know how much of this money in our bank do we need to keep to run our charity, and how much of it can we spend. So as a rule of thumb, the Charity Commission recommends a charity keeps about 6 months, 3 to 6 months of money in their bank account to cover their costs in case something goes wrong. They can keep the bills paying, they can keep the lights on, they can pay their staff. And anything beyond 6 months is additional cash, and then spend it. Go look at prostate cancer, go open that cricket club, go give men free therapy. The problem with Movember is they've not got 6 months. They say they have 9 months, but what they actually have is about 4.5 years of cash in the bank that they're just not spending. So they've got several times more money than they should have, and they exist in a charity sector that is just deeply, deeply impoverished and desperate for cash. So yeah, there's loads of charities. I know shelters, abuse shelters, that guy, working for free, he's rattling a tin can for a few quid. I know charities that are going to go bankrupt. I know people that are leading this area of advocacy that don't know where the next paycheck is coming from. I know researchers who are dog sitting and cat sitting just to raise a few quid to fund their PhD. And then we see Movember sat on a mountain of cash, £50 million. And I don't know why it's being spent, and not to mention they're not a British charity. They don't have any British trustees. And I'm like, why are you here? Like you should have a seat at the table for sure, but not at the head of the table. Like, you're guests and you're late to the party, so have a sit down and share the stage with someone else.
If you could distribute that money, or if you could add what you would like to happen in the health strategy, what would be sort of on the top of your agenda, and how would that rubber meet the road?
I think a new expansive view of men's health that mirrors the way we talk about women's health. So often we talk about men's health as, blood pressure and prostate and, heart disease and obesity, BMI, body fat, and those things are obviously very, very important, especially for men, but I want to look outside. I don't want to look just in here. I want to look outside. What are the external structural causes of sort of things that impact men's health to the detriment of their health? So things like experiences of abuse, experiences of bullying, adverse childhood experiences, sexual violence, things like that. Like, I want to know what happens to a man's health when he's deprived of his child as a result of going through family court. What happens to a man's mental health or his chances of suicide if he's been sexually abused as a boy in school? What happens to a boy's mental health if he's bullied in school? What happens to, a father who has his child turned against him in a child custody battle? What happens to a man's health when he's under debt? What are these things? What are these different things out there? I mean, I'm interested in prostates and all that too, but I want to know more about things like domestic violence. I obviously talk about that a lot, and it's frustrating that people don't connect those dots in the way that I want them connected, where I'll see, male suicide as the biggest risk to every man's life, including yours and mine, and will remain the biggest risk to your life every day until you're about 50, and perhaps even beyond that. And things like domestic violence are a massive cause of suicide. There's so many men, I've spoken to them, who attempt suicide because they're being abused. They don't see any way out. I mean, the stats are 11% of men who are being abused will consider suicide. So that, I would consider domestic violence a men's health issue. But a lot of the organisations that are sat around those tables for the men's health strategy don't see that. So I reckon there's going to be a lot of arguing over things like domestic violence. Should that be part of the men's health strategy? Because it's part of the women's health strategy, as it should be. But I don't know if it will be for men. So I would like that to be part of it. A more expansive, holistic, external view of men's health.
Would you throw loneliness in there?
Oh, yeah.
That's going on right now. I think, obviously, you only got to look at what Scott Galloway's talking about over and over again, which is the just rise of being a below 30 young man is like that is one of the most challenging sort of areas to be in right now, and demographics to be. And yeah, would you? I just think that is going to cause a cascade of events down the line. And you mentioned even the you're sort of, we're sort of safe until we're unsafe until we hit 50, but that's surely that's based on data of sort of our parents, right, and 50-year-olds of that generation who view mental health slightly differently, who've had experiences offline up until sort of the last 10, 20 years. And I think I can only imagine that whole demographic is just going to keep shifting, and it's
like
just
a
going to get
wave.
later. Yeah, I feel like it's just going to keep going. Do you not think?
I think, I think a lot of people are saying that, and that's why I said it could even go beyond 50. By the time we reach that age, that wave might have shifted. I know. I mean, I read recently that a man who's 85 and older is about 1,300% more likely to end his life by suicide. That 1,300% more likely than a woman of that age. It's I think that is the biggest difference in suicide rates of any age group between the sexes. And I think that a lot of that's down to loneliness. A lot of those men in their 80s, mid-80s have lost their wives, and they're like, I've got nothing to live for. So to answer your question, loneliness, absolutely, 100%. That should be number one on the agenda in many ways. I have a really good friend called Susie Bennett, Dr. Susie Bennett, who's a male suicide researcher, and she's put together the first agenda ever on male suicide research, which basically looks at what are the research questions that most urgently need to be answered. And she basically got together, I think, maybe 100 lived experience experts, bereaved families, and a dozen or so clinical experts from all over the world, and put to them, well, let's do a vote. What do you think are the most important topics to research? Number one, which was endorsed as essential, very important by 98% of those she talked to, was loneliness. So if male suicide is the biggest threat to your life, which it is, then by her research, male loneliness could be the most important associated factor with suicide. And therefore, that's why it should be number one on the agenda for the men's health strategy. Absolutely massive, massive problem, getting worse. Like suicide rates, despite people talking about it, they're not getting better, they are getting worse. Nothing's changing. Our intervention strategies are not working. So we need something new. And I feel like a more serious discussion about loneliness that doesn't revolve around these really pathetic catchphrases like man keeping would be really helpful. Because so the problem with male loneliness is that not only is it a huge cause of sort of sadness and isolation for men, and therefore suicide, it's also the idea of men seeking help from another. We're going to men's groups, men's spaces, they are also vilified. So you've got the double jeopardy of this very real problem within men, which is loneliness and isolation. But then the thing that might be the antidote to that problem, which is men's spaces, they are being taken away. They're closed down, shouted down, like people hit there, like, the Garrick, you've got Boy Scouts closing. So people are very hostile to the very thing that might save men from suicide. And that thing is obviously men's spaces. So, yeah.
It's really interesting. I live the south of the UK in Brighton, and as you might know, Brighton is regarded as probably one of the most open, diverse cities in the UK. It's a smorgasbord of individuals that you can get here and characters, which is so much fun. Like, no one's the same, and it's probably one of the most left-leaning cities in the country. We had the Green Party that were in charge of some of the area as well. And
I also heard that Brighton has some of the worst recycling rates in the country.
Horrendous.
Then what the hell does that? That's just bullshit.
So, I mean,
that's just classic Brighton, all chat. When it comes to actually sitting down, washing out your tin cans and recycling them, I don't want to do that. But they'll bleat on with whatever it is they're putting on their Twitter. But
I mean, I don't know the depths of it, but I know personally the you would look at it as like the banner was much more the banner that they were waving was far more exciting than the actual strategy that they had. So it was like, well, let's get a win, and then oh wow, we won. Oh, we've got to do this. But my point where I was going with this is it's a very very left leaning city, like, and men's spaces. I would have thought this would have been somewhere where they'd be thriving. And I've in the last year had at least 3 people personally come up to me saying, I need help and I want to be able to talk to more men. and I don't know where to go. And I thought, oh, well, surely there'll be a men's group in Brighton in the area. And said, no, there's none. And those are individuals that are from in their 20s, 30s, and then one guy that's in his 60s. And they had nowhere to go. And I mean, I even thought, wow, do I even start putting something together? Because I then go back to myself and I think, well, my social outlet for ridding myself of the feeling of loneliness is sport. It's a great outlet for doing that. It is team sport, phenomenal. Even individual sports, clubs, things like that. But not everyone is a sportsman. Not everyone it wants to play a sport, and there's creatives and there's tons of them down here, but they still have those needs as a man and they don't have anywhere to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my answer would be you can set one up. I mean, there are some great charities like Talk Club, who I would highly recommend, and they'll give you the training they'll train you with the mental health sort of support, and they'll give you the materials you need to set up your group, and they'll obviously push people towards your group. And I guess you've identified a gap in the market, because I think all men would benefit from these spaces, and there's plenty of such men in Brighton, as there are everywhere across the country. But what we're seeing, thankfully, is the birth of social prescription programs. So instead of clinical prescriptions where you might get like an SSRI, you'll be given like a social prescription. So you'll be sent off to an allotment or a cricket club or a hiking society. There's obviously men's sheds, which I really like. So you might want to open up a shed in Brighton. It's just so great. Men's Sheds is a charity in the UK, and it's basically a series of different sheds all over the country where men and women can go to, but it is mostly men. And they just basically build and fix things for local people, like toys for children. So if you got a toy you need fixing, or anything that needs fixing, you take it down to your local men's sheds. And it's a bunch of men, formerly lonely men, that have now got together, and they work in the shed for free, just fixing things and doing things, cleaning up society. And it's just amazing. You met half a dozen old lonely men in there working together, doing woodwork and painting things, and it melts my heart. So social prescription programs, they're really, really wonderful, and I think they're a lot better than clinical prescriptions most of the time. But also they do highlight how we have failed men. They highlight how we've portrayed men, and we've sort of forced them into a position where men have to basically take care of themselves, because up until recently, men's health wasn't a priority. So I guess these are the response, and I think they're really, really wonderful. It's basically by and for charities, so men setting up charities for other men to help other men for free, and it's amazing.
Do you think there's a different form of shame that men feel like for kind of reaching out for this sort of help? And what I mean by that is, we've had Keir Starmer say that the young boys are now a threat, but then the shame that used to exist was the shame of kind of opening up, being open, vulnerable, talking about your issues. And I actually think, just anecdotally, I think we're moving past that. Like the phrase of talk about, it's okay to talk, and that's just been spoken about so much. And I experienced so many men opening up, talking about their experiences. I literally was on a call today where a guy, within the first 20 seconds, just said, "Hey mate, it's been a busy month. I literally had a massive burnout at the end of last year. I ended up being in the fetal position in my office, crying my eyes out." This is a guy from a sports world who would have never said that maybe a year ago, or maybe 5 years ago, just would have never have said that. But he's opened that within the first 20 seconds of our phone call. So I think the ability for men to talk is now there. I think it's much more accessible in the sense that, like, it's welcomed. But I think there's a level of shame of sort of going to a men's group feeling like that's the thing you need in order to rid yourself of the issues that you've got. But then there's also the shame of being told, like, you're a man, like you shouldn't have issues, like you've created all of this world and it's your fault for doing that.
I think I've always questioned this stigma around men not talking. Perhaps it's because I'm of a generation where that just didn't exist in the same way. But it's not something I've not really seen as much as I've been told. I've always found men to be very emotionally eloquent and thoughtful. I know some of the research I've done or supportive in male suicide, asked men to basically fill out this long survey about your personal experiences and like some of the most difficult things you could ever tell anyone. So, things about childhood abuse and sexual violence and grooming and all these things like that. And these men were not short on words at all when they were filling out these questionnaires. Like, they were going into long detail, very long, eloquent, heartbreaking answers, just like a big waterfall of words. And I was told that you didn't know how to talk about your emotions, but I'm reading these. Well, I didn't read them, but they went anonymously to someone else. But they were very, very long, and like these men were very thoughtful. And I know similar research has looked at men who have completed suicide. So these are men that died by suicide, middle-aged men in particular, and they found that 91% of them did seek help from therapeutic services or sort of medical care, and they still died by suicide. So more than 9 in 10 men who died by suicide did seek help and still died by suicide. So I'm not sure whether it's necessarily men aren't talking, although that might be part of it. I think it's more around the idea of we're not listening, and we're slowly listening to men. So when you say, are men talking more, I'm like, maybe we're actually finally listening to them a little bit. And I don't think the way men communicate their emotions or communicate their distress is necessarily the same as women's. I know if we talk about suicide, like men talk about suicide and distress in very matter-of-fact ways. So a man who goes to his doctor and says, I'm feeling suicidal, in a very matter-of-fact, even in like a joking way, a man might say it at the pub. That's so easy to be missed because it's very flat terms. Whereas a woman that's maybe a little bit more explicit in her emotions and maybe cries a bit more, that's taken a little bit more seriously. And there's definitely research that finds men that disclose their distress to GPs, for example, they're not taken as seriously because they do it in such plain terms. But that doesn't mean what he's feeling is any less than someone who is crying. So I think it's more to do with understanding how men are already talking and how men display signs of distress rather than assuming that they weren't talking and now suddenly are.
I agree. I think the way in which some people confuse when men talk is in group settings, and they think, oh, it's okay to talk. And name me a man that will be comfortable with opening up about their innermost feelings. Name me a woman that would be really comfortable from straight off the bat talking about their innermost feelings in front of a large group of people. That's, for a human experience, that's just a daunting thing in general, not siloed to men. And I think we just say that you should open up and talk, but it's probably conflated with what's the setting at which you're actually measuring when that talking is happening.
That is amazing how I never really thought about how much bravery it really does take for men to speak in men's groups. I've been to a lot of men's groups. I get invited to them, and I always feel like I'm the least brave of all the men in there in terms of what some of these men talk about. I'm amazed, inspired, impressed that you are able to, having never met me or perhaps anyone else in this circle, you are being this vulnerable. And like, we're not clinicians. There's no actual duty of care for us not to go on telling people, but obviously we don't. It's like a very honourable connection there. And I've never thought about how much bravery that does take, but it seems blindingly obvious that it does. But there was obviously an important lesson there where, like I said, men don't necessarily talk in the same way as women. Like, if you talk about the traditional way in which someone does open up, it would be someone going into a clinical space, a very sanitized environment, run by the state, so the NHS, and you're going to go into that room and you're going to speak to a clinician who's probably a woman. And I just don't know if that's really set up for men. Like, men don't want to talk even in the way we're talking to a clinician. You speak face to face. That's very difficult. I think men prefer to be what's called side by side or shoulder to shoulder time, so not face to face time. And they like to be, on a walk, taking the dogs out, playing golf, cooking dinner together, driving a car. Like, it's quite helpful just by not having people facing like that and having them facing forwards, for example, as you would as you're driving a car. It changes the whole dynamic. I think if men are struggling to talk, if your partner or husband, father, son is struggling to talk to you, I would say just go for a walk or drive, and you'll be amazed at how much just literally turning their faces away from each other really helps them. And also the group talk thing as well, not just side by side, but groups around some sort of physical activity is always good, because the group thing allows men to sort of act as role models for each other. So if you've got something you want to share but you don't feel confident, if the person sat next to you suddenly comes in and shares what he's talking about, that makes you feel a lot more confident in being able to follow him down that road. So yeah, it all leans back to a fundamental shift in how society listens to men and how society encourages men to talk to them by creating spaces for them.
Yeah, I've had that experience with therapy over the last year for myself. So I started it almost 18 months ago, and for the first 6 months that it would be with my therapist and I that we would meet. Sometimes we would actually meet online because of he lived in Ireland, but actually when I got to a certain stage where I felt I was still resisting saying a few things that I really wanted to say. And it wasn't down to I didn't feel a connection from him, but it was the fact that I just felt the setting was off. So I just texted him one day and I said, when we next meet, let's meet at this cafe and we'll go for a walk in Brighton. And it was from what I knew, that I knew if I change the setting, if I actually stand alongside him, maybe things will change. So maybe I was sort of already starting to relive what I knew what was going to happen. But I suddenly opened up one day, just on the seafront. We were sitting on a park bench and I told him things that I have probably only told one person on the planet, and maybe even just him. And it was down to the fact that I got out of a setting where I felt it was not clinical, but it was just less, there was more space. There was, like I said, I'm from sport, so I kind of feel like I need to be moving my body to like actually get something out. And that walk, that open space, and we actually sat on that park bench, and the deathly silence that came over the experience for about 5 minutes, where we didn't say anything for 5 minutes, and it was almost like a competition of who could speak first. Lost.
Yeah. It's like Good Will Hunting.
But it was almost like that scene from Good Will Hunting, right? Honestly,
well, yeah,
it was sitting on a park bench.
Yeah.
But think of that, right? Think of that moment with Ron Williams, like that amazing speech, that's viral speech that he has there. It's on a park bench. It's two men sharing things, because he took him out of that room that they have in Good Will Hunting.
I think, yeah. I mean, also, it must be said, there's a lot of women that appreciate these sort of approaches as well. Whenever I post about these things about, the power of hiking for men, and there's always women that are like, I want to do hiking. I want to do that too. So I mean, it's not to say that men only speak this way and women only speak that way. There's plenty of women that want to get on board with these social prescription programs. Like, there are women's sheds now, and I think that's really, really, really important. And I just think changing the environment really helps. I mean, I work in the creative sector, and even on the TinMen, I have to put up a new piece of content every other day that is, unique and creative and thoughtful and original. And obviously you get writer's block, and I'm sat literally right here. Like, sometimes I don't know what to do. And it's just, if I just go and take like a piss or a shower or take the dogs out, it's like suddenly I'm like, wow, I've got all that, just breaking the cycle really, really helps. I know Steve Jobs, he was a big fan of having meetings whilst walking around Apple HQ. So he wouldn't have board meetings in a boardroom. He'd be like, let's go. And he'd walk around the campus of Apple. And I'm all about that, just moving. I think I'm just, even on podcasts, I move around quite a bit. I'd love to do this conversation walking. So maybe next time we'll do that. And I think,
yeah, next time we'll bring all the equipment, just walk down Brighton Seafront.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But I also think so what you're talking about with men having to be listened to more, I think that comes with people have to be ready to hear what they have to say. And I definitely think that from a female side. I've been really interested seeing online on various different platforms, there are a few women that are actually banging the drum on, if you really want a man to open up, you as the woman have to be ready to hear what he has to say. Because I've found in my experience, and this is my own personal experience from relationships I've had, and it's something that's come out of my therapy, is that I will forego saying what I really think through the worry of hurting the other person, knowing that if they were to say the same to me, I feel like I can take it a little bit more. Now, that's probably due to the fact that I've come from the world of professional sport, where almost every corner you're turning, you're finding some sort of criticism. So you're just kind of hardened to the fact that you're going to find some sort of criticism. You're like, and if you don't feel criticism, you're like, oh God, it must be an off day. But I used to withhold saying what I really felt, because I was like, if I'm to say what you're saying to me, then I feel it's going to be received in a very different way. It's going to be, I'm going to be vilified for saying it.
It's that's what it's about. I mean, I sympathize so much with that. I think I've been in the exact same boat as you, where I've had like things that former girlfriends have done that upset me, and I won't tell them, or maybe I will tell them, you know, you've done X and Y that really upset me, and then they'll get upset, and then they'll sometimes even start crying, to the point where I then have to apologize to them for having told them that what they've done has upset me, and I'm so sorry that you doing this thing has upset me. I was like, oh, I'm never going to tell you anything ever again. And I feel like I mean, again, it's like a lot of people asking men to talk, but they're not ready to hear what they've got to say. Just more generally speaking, we're not ready to hear that 1 in 3 abuse victims is a man. Like, we're not ready for that conversation. So stop telling these men to talk when we've proven ourselves totally unfit to listen to what men are already telling us. And although we talk about girlfriends and stuff, I think that does scale up. I think there's a lot of people that are just not ready to hear what men have got to say. Or they're only willing to let men talk along a very narrow set of sort of politically convenient talking points, like a scripted sort of outlet. And I don't know. And people say that, oh, I want a boyfriend that can cry. And I'm sure a lot of people do. But when they say that, I think that what they mean is that a boyfriend that can watch a sad film and, you know, shed a few tears and be like, oh, they don't want some a man who's ugly crying, talking about his traumatic childhood, just like literally bored. No, they don't want that. I don't think women do want that. Well, they want the previous one, the poetic Hollywood style crying man, not the ugly, the man in the fetal position who you mentioned. And that's a shame. And I feel like a lot of men feel that, and a lot of men don't feel safe to talk about it unless it's with other men, in the way you described.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we've hit this. I don't know whether you feel like we're at a bit of a tipping point, because I also see young women now also talking about that they do want those sort of old traditional values of a man, to be protector, to be strong. Like, and again, it's like the pendulum swinging, right? So it swung one way, like men were so stoic and they didn't talk about their emotions, and then now, oh my god, we've actually got a lot of emotional simpy men that it's got a bit too much, and then we need to swing it back the other way. And do you know what I mean?
Is it hypocritical? I mean, I'm not single, but when I was single, I dated a lot of feminists. Would you believe it? We seem to get along really well, despite what people seem to think. And we'll be talking about on dates, oh, you know, I always wondered why men can't wear, you know, makeup and nail varnish. And they'll be like, you can do that. You can do that. I'm like, no, I cannot. If I'd sat down on a date with a full face of fucking makeup and mascara and lipstick, you would be gone. Don't tell me men can wear makeup. Because if I did that, if I went, oh, I'm going to go to the toilet right now and I'm going to get all dolled up and I'm going to sit down here and then we'll see how this date goes. And you are not going to leave. You're going to stay and we're going to split the bill. And then is that what you want? No, it's not what you want. And I think we have gender norms for men are a lot more rigid than for women. That's just quite clearly, especially in the way you behave and how you dress and the way you express yourself. And I'm always quietly envious of some of the clothing my girlfriend gets to wear, like the most amazing, fluffy, colourful pajama trousers. And like, I mean, I'm building up to having some bright pink. Look at these. I mean, that's pretty.
Oh yeah, they're the Crocs. Yeah, they're nice.
Bright pink, glow in the dark, fluffy pink Crocs. Thanks, Mum, for Christmas present. But that's as far as I can get, as much as I can get away with. I feel like men are being a little bit more bravo in what they're wearing, but starting from the feet up. So the socks are looking great now. I've got some great socks, but I still don't dare wear. I'm certainly not going to wear a full face of makeup and nail varnish. My point is that people say men can wear makeup, and then if I did ever wear makeup in those situations, they'd be horrified. So no, we can't wear makeup.
Going to these sort of stereotypical gender roles, I guess, there was an interesting thing you put out about a study of Australian men being asked about therapy, and it was 45% of men dropped out of 1,900 men that did the study. It found that 45% dropped out of therapy, and that 26% had said they'd had one session, which is obviously, you're measuring literally men opening up, right? So that is men talking, right? and just under 50% dropped out of it, and only a quarter went to one session. But then there was sort of going on from that. It was the
reasons.
gap between the genders of who was actually doing the therapy. So the majority of therapists being women, and the lack of male therapists that we don't have. Why do you think that's happening?
Half of men that go to therapy in Australia that were studied dropped out, and then a quarter only went to one session. And I feel like if we're going to measure anything on that, if there was a cricket club, just to stick with you, and then half the people that went to cricket never came back, or did come back, but not for very long, I'd be like, there's a serious problem with whoever's doing the coaching here. I'm sorry to say, Lewis. But no one ever thinks about that. And it's very, very true. And I must say that research by Zach Seidler from Movember, and I know I've said some bad things about Movember, but they've also done really great work as well. It's a very mixed bag. So I appreciate that paper, and it's very interesting. And yeah, I think there needs to be more men in therapy, more men giving therapy, more men creating these spaces, finding new approaches, maybe going to the beach or the ocean with their clients to sit down quietly and think, or doing the different parts of social prescription talked about. There needs to be a renaissance within therapy and the psychological industry in general that better sees men's distress and better supports men, especially suicidal men. And a lot of that is just by having a more male point of view. Like, I think we've grown very used to the idea that a workplace that's dominated by men, especially at senior level, will create a working environment that is better suited to men. That's obviously a very feminist idea that I agree with. And we've seen a huge change in 20 years. Like, the financial sector has changed a lot, so that is less true than it's ever been. But we don't ever look at the psychological industry, and we look at like clinical therapists, clinical psychologists are 80% women. And no one even really considers that maybe having 80% of clinical psychologists being women will create, inadvertently, it's not that they're doing it on purpose, but will inadvertently create a set of ideas and practices that are more suitable for women and designed for women, which they are. And I think that's reflected in the research that says men are dropping out because number one reason why men dropped out in that survey, in that study, was I didn't have a connection with a therapist. So if half of men are dropping out of therapy, and the number one reason for them dropping out is I didn't have a connection with a therapist, then why on earth are we blaming men? Like, blame the therapist. Not again, it's not their fault, but blame the fact that we don't have a good enough set of solutions within the therapeutic environment. Rather than just the men, like they've turned up, haven't they? That's all they can really do.
When I read that stat, I only placed myself in that experience, and I've spent so much time in Australia. And I wondered what that stat would be like if it was America and the UK, because I still think there's a large stigma around therapy in Australia. There's still the whole "she'll be all right, mate," and that sort of characterization of men. But when I sought out therapy, it took me 2 years to find a therapist. From the moment I said, I think I need to be doing this, to then actually doing it and setting myself up for it. And the reason being, and I think, George, this is the arsehole corner of my personality, is that, and it probably did come from sport, was that I felt I needed someone credible. So in sport, there is an element of when you're being coached someone, especially at the pro level, you kind of want to say, who are you to tell me what to do? You need to show your credibility as to why you're doing that. And I could go into reasons how people show their credibility. But I felt in the male space for therapy, there were a lot of people that were kind of doing it for the sake of it being, well, I've been a trained yoga teacher as well, and you kind of want to feel like you're healing the world. And when you go and you can feel empowered by having maybe the label of therapist that you're just going to heal all men. But at the same time, I think my experience has been that men sometimes want to look up to the person they're talking to sometimes. I feel like women will happily be sort of told what to do by someone equal to them, and they'll have that shared experience. Men kind of want to be told what to do a little bit. And so therefore that person that does it, they kind of feel like there need to be like a level of credibility and solid. So for me, it wasn't even about I didn't actually care about the credentials of my therapist. I actually cared about their life experience. And just so happens my therapist is like one of the most academically like, he's got so much credibility behind his experiences of life and what he's been in. He's been doctor, he's been a neuroscientist. He's literally so credible that I was like, and the way he spoke, the way when I met him and we were talking about existentialism and philosophy, and I was like, wow, okay, this guy is pulling me in towards a version of myself that I want to be, not only just kind of therapy, but almost mentoring. And that for me was a big driver for sticking with him. Whereas I felt if I had looked at someone, well, I did find people where I was like, don't feel your life experiences, or again, it sounds harsh. Again, this is the asshole corner of my personality. Is like, it doesn't feel like this feels credible enough to kind of tell me what I should and shouldn't feel and how I should feel, or hold the space for me to be able to talk about this. So that for me was in what I felt.
I don't think you're alone feeling that way. I think a lot of men, they want to see their role models as role models, something that they've got that they want. And if someone's not got something that I want, then I'm not sure why I'm taking advice from them, whether that's any sort of advice, including therapeutic advice. It reminds me a lot of, I think I'm leaning quite heavily in now into the classic gender stereotypes of men are from Mars and women are from Venus, which argues that in these situations, women just want to be heard and men want a solution. So when a woman goes to her partner and she has a problem, she just wants to be heard. She's like, I've experienced this today. I want to talk to you about it. I want to feel heard. I want you to give me space. That's typically what a woman wants, but certainly not all women. Whereas a man typically doesn't necessarily want to be heard. He just wants a solution. He just wants a solution to his problem. And obviously there's a generalizations, but it shines new light on that classic argument where a man is trying to support his wife or vice versa, and he's providing solutions, and she's like, you're not listening to what I'm saying. I just want to be heard. Stop telling me, do X, Y, and Z. Just listen to me. I'm not looking for. And then he's like, why is she not doing this and that? And I've given her the solution. She's still talking about it. And it's just, I think, generally speaking, we come at problems from different angles, men and women, which is why we make such a great team. But yeah, I would say you're not alone in the sense that many men more often at least, want a solution to their problems and are less interested in being heard, whereas women perhaps more often want to be heard and aren't as interested in a solution. So all the more reason to have more men in therapeutic spaces giving therapy to men like you.
You called them sort of, I think you called them superheroes in that post. How do we find more role models, more superheroes for especially young men to look up to?
Well, we start talking about them. And we get them at the earliest possible age. So I'm talking that the ultimate role model for men and boys are dads. So more dads at home with children, raising kids. And I'm all aboard like men, doing more at home, but they also need equal rights. It's not fair for us to demand equal responsibility from fathers without giving them equal rights and equal respect as well. So I would say those three things need to be given to fathers. Equal rights, literally, and I mean that literally speaking, rights, equal respect, and then of course equal responsibility. More fathers at home with especially boys, more parental leave for dads that they can't transfer, use it or lose it. That sort of thing, really, really good. A lot more childcare as well. Flexible working hours for dads so they can work at home, part-time parenting, part-time work, that sort of stuff. And then of course more teachers in classrooms. That's the secondary thing. I guess that's the second role model that boys are missing. 80% of teachers are women, and in the early years it's higher. Like in early years, in kindergarten, preschool, there are more in America. There are more women flying fighter jets in the U.S. military as a share of the occupation than there are men teaching kindergarten. So that woman you see flying a fighter jet that we rightly hold up as a hero and on the vanguard of ending sexism, the man in the kindergarten classroom is even braver than her. There's even half as many of him. So I'm like, we should be lifting up the male kindergarten teacher as much as we are lifting up that female fighter jet pilot, if not more so. So a stark lack of visibility in importance of fatherhoods, the importance of men in classrooms. I mean, in the UK, 1/4 of all public schools, primary schools, have no male teacher whatsoever. So not a single male teacher in the entire school. That's 1 in 4 primary schools. That's just crazy. It's not so far from close to good enough. So yeah, more dads, more teachers, just a kinder, more empowering conversation about men in general. Like, not only are we not being shown these male role models, we're given the opposite. We're only ever given horrendous role models for men. Whenever you hear the word men in the news, you're always covering my ears now. It's like, oh, what have they done now? And it's not that I'm against talking about, men that do horrific things, but only when it's counterbalanced. If we're going to be talking about the men that do amazing things, life-saving things every single day. Yeah, it's a bit like, obviously we saw the fires in California, and so many firefighters are probably vast majority, if not all men, risking their lives every day to put out fires. We don't gender that.
I think of the Twin Towers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Look at all the images of the Twin Towers and those images of firefighters going up the staircases, and they're all men.
That's one of the things that always blows my mind. They are literally all men. Every single firefighter that died in 9/11, of which there are 344, they were all men. Not 90%, 95%, or 99%, not 100%. And we refer to them as firefighters, which I can understand, but really, on that instance, they are firemen. And on that day, we obviously talked a lot about male violence, because the people hijacking the planes were also men. And that's fair, we can talk about that. But so too, we should talk about male heroism, because 100% of the firefighters were also men. So yeah, it's often men that are lighting the fires, but it's also men that are kicking down the door and dragging you out of the building as well. So you need a bit of both, everything in moderation. And I think just that more kinder talk of men, allowing men to speak in their own way, more men in classrooms, more fathers at home, get us quite a long way towards where we need to be.
Is the fathers at home one's an interesting one, because I'm at the age now where a bunch of my school friends are now having kids, and we talk about the maternity and paternity leave and the differences that are there. And I think some of the mums are, with their businesses, they get 6 to 9 months off work, sometimes even longer. I think the longest one of the guys had was 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's what my brother-in-law had.
Yeah, so two weeks. Now, I have a very limited knowledge of child psychology and the sort of evolution of a child's psychology, but from what I've sort of picked up is that the bond between a mother and a baby very early on is super important. It's important with a man, but then it is undoubtedly, now seeing some of my friends as fathers having their kids turn from being babies to infants, now toddlers, and getting their own personalities, and there being a little bit of blowback every time things get knocked over, and a bit more tension. The fathers sort of now become really important in that, and it's sort of the setting of the rules. And we obviously, there's huge stats. I don't know the stats for fatherless homes and crime rates and what happens for that. That's, you would know far more than me. But it's undoubtedly, there's a switch in when the importance of men really come in for that sort of disciplinarian, that hierarchical, alpha male type feel in an understanding right v wrong. And I wonder what can be done for almost like a leave for men when their child reaches a certain age to help that, support that. Because if they're still absent and having to work and being away, then that sort of gets taken away.
I'm a fan of shared parental leave. That's use it or lose it, so you can't be transferred. Let's just say it's 6 months for fathers, 6 months for mothers, and then the mother would have additional medical leave on top of that to recover from the traumatic experience of actually giving birth to the child, which obviously the dad doesn't do. So she has that. I am not a medical, I have no idea how long that should be. Let's say 3 weeks. She has that, and then plus the 6 months, he gets just the 6 months. And yeah, obviously there was very practical reasons why a baby needs their mother around, often for breastfeeding. But then there are really, really important needs for fathers around, especially later on, often around being a disciplinarian. I got 2 dogs now, and as you've seen, they're pretty rowdy. My girlfriend's very good at the fun, looking after them, nurturing them. I always think that she's a little bit like a human dog. I think they just see her as one of them. Hooray! But for me, I'm the one that tells them off. I'm like, sit down, don't do that. You go to bed. You've had enough now. No more dinner. And they just listen to me more. I don't know why that is. They listen to me more. And I feel like a lot of fathers provide a very similar sense of disciplinarian as well, but also just more they also share a different type of like love and care. Like roughhousing, for example, is really, really important. I'm a big fan of like roughhousings where like a dad typically wrestles with their children, and especially boys, like they basically introduce children to types of physical contact that are not fighting or sex. Like a lot of boys grow up and they think the only physical contact, sex or fighting. But roughhousing, it shows a spectrum of different types of contact, and obviously helps boys understand boundaries to physical contact. So, and roughhousing is mostly men, fathers that do it. Of course, there are mothers that do it too, but I think most of us know it's dads. Like my dad used to wrap me up in the duvet and spin me around the bedroom, and I absolutely loved it. So I think that's important too. Maybe not as important as breastfeeding, but it's certainly important nonetheless. And you just got to look at, like you talked about Brighton being famous for being diverse, and perhaps in ways it is, but I'm from London and we're famous for something different, which is often knife crime. And although the conversation of violent crime in London is centred around women, it's not women that are most at risk to knife crime, it's boys, and young black boys living in inner cities, and often from fatherless homes, because that's where gangs get the boys from. They know to go to the fatherless homes because there is no male role model there. The boys that come from these homes who don't have a dad and may not have a male teacher, they're looking for leadership, they're looking for a sense of belonging, looking for purpose and a family, and that's what a gang seems to be. Of course, it's not that, but they position themselves, oh, well, come to us, we'll give you that leadership, we'll give you that purpose in life. And gangs know that. And that's why they target these boys, not just through violence, but like criminal exploitation. The biggest victim of modern slavery right now in the UK are young boys. And often it's like county lines, drug deals, and being coerced into gangs and, have their lives totally ruined or killed. So things like boxing societies, I think, are really, really good. Like we talked about social prescription and how like men's sheds helps older men feel like a place of belonging. Boxing society, it's not as good as a dad, but it's better than nothing. So boxing societies, youth clubs, Boy Scouts, that sort of thing, bushcraft society is really, really good. Get boys off the street, getting them doing something. And like again, like especially when it's centered around some sort of physical exercise like boxing, it's like a really great outlet for the aggression that they probably have, but they're exercising in a way that's positive rather than like deadly.
Yeah, I think for boys, sport ends up being a great outlet. Boxing, simple, sort of, doesn't take much technical skill to throw a punch and do the training. And you see it in films, right? You see it so many films where this young kid who's come from a rough neighborhood joins a boxing gym, ends up being like champion of the world. But like from a much lesser scale, not everyone's got to be champion of the world, but just that they meet the coach who then puts in the rules of behaviors in the gym, but also what it's like being in life. And yeah, I'm a huge advocate for using sport and activity for being able to help young men. But it's more the character building, right? So it's more what like when I go in and talk to schools, or if I'm out there in clubs, it's I don't really care the level at which they're trying to perform the sport at from that level. It's what do you get out of this as a person?
I mean, it reminds me a little bit of that viral clip of Ian Wright. You seen that clip where he's basically being interviewed and he's talking about his sports coach being his ultimate. I think he probably came from a fatherless home. And he talks about how he had an amazing bond when he was going off the rails. He met a man who was like a sports coach and really gave him belief. And then he obviously became like an international footballer. And then during the interview, the man turns up, the sports coach turns up, and Ian Phillips said, I thought you were dead. And he just bursts into tears. And he hugs the sports coach, and because he's on a few stairs down, he's like kind of hugging his head, and he looks like Ian Wright's a little boy again, and he says something like, I remembered because his sports coach also was in the RAF, and he flew over Buckingham Palace during some sort of like Memorial Day, and he said he was more proud of Ian Wright playing for England than he was having flown over Buckingham Palace for the RAF. And it's just like makes you want to cry, and that is the role model we need. That sort of thing. Everyone needs a role model like that. Every boy. So whenever people talk about there's no male role models, I'm not talking about some sort of celebrity blockbuster podcast bro, some Hollywood whatever. I want just more men more good men like that. More sports coaches, more dads, more teachers, more boxing societies. That sort of thing. I don't want podcasters. I want real role models.
What I actually think you're touching on is something that I actually aimed for. I've spoken about this before a bit on the podcast. Is one of my goals growing up was to actually be a role model. Like I remember vividly saying to myself, like, whatever you do, make sure you become a role model for the 15-year-old version of me that ends up hopefully getting there. So achieved my sporting success that I wanted to achieve, retired from that, now doing what I'm doing and working with every person I work with, every room I go into, it is built out of how can I be the best role model for these people in the room. But I do that selflessly, but it's a selfish act. It's a very selfish act. I have to admit that, because in doing that, I feel good about myself. I feel good about myself. And it's probably one of the very few things I have, because sport was taken away from me, where I can't have that feeling of like achievement in my life in that sense. So I don't have that anymore. But for me, like one of the best achievements I can have is seeing someone that I potentially have had an impact in going and doing well. And like, I cannot describe to people that feeling. And I'm constantly saying to, whether it's guys my age or even older, if like, is there's one thing you can do if you feel lost, if you feel like you don't know what to do, is to be a role model. Like, act in a way that you feel people would be proud of. And even if you heard someone describing you, that you would be proud of someone saying that. And I just cannot describe, one, how it makes you feel, but the effect it has on those around you. And I will miss, like, I will undoubtedly miss trying to be a role model. Like, there will be moments where I fall short all the time. But if I aim for it, if it's an aim of mine, then it's better than not having it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a sports career, but I think I've definitely put behind my sort of monkey brain career, where I'm just like, money, career. And now I'm like, actually, I can forego some of that, and I can do work that is more meaningful and hopefully makes me a role model in the way you've described. I mean, I do certainly get a lot of kind emails kind messages that make me very uncomfortable, telling me that I am a role model. I really appreciate it, but I always hate getting compliments like that, because it makes me uncomfortable. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing greater in life, in my view, than to be a role model to someone else. Like, I have my own role models, and it's a really great way of like living beyond your own life. Like, once you're gone, which you all eventually will be, like, your ability to be a role model to others continues. So I can see why that is, and I don't think that makes you selfish. And I guess maybe I'm similarly selfish if it does.
No, I think it needs more. Bit of a left turn, but explain what the supermarket gender pay gap issue is going on right now.
Well, it's the biggest pay gap lawsuit in private sector history. I'm not sure in the world, but certainly in the UK. And it's centered around Asda, but it could definitely scale up. This is very much on the precipice now. If Asda go down, Tesco, Sainsbury's, the Co-op, and the various other retailers are next. And what's being argued is that, generally speaking, there are two types of worker at Asda. There's those on the shop floor, stacking shelves, helping customers, scanning products on tills, bagging things up. And then there's people in the warehouse driving forklift trucks, moving things around, heavy lifting. Typically, there are mostly women on the shop floor, and typically it's mostly men in warehouses. And now the lawsuit is basically arguing that those that work on the shop floor are equally valuable to those in the factory, and therefore should be paid the same amount. And it's almost gone through. It's on the very last stage, as they have one last chance to make their argument. If not, we're talking like £1 billion in compensation paid to thousands of employees, backdated years. It could actually bankrupt them. And a lot of retailers are like, we are really worried about this. And there's people saying, well, working in a factory isn't the same as working on the shop floor. First of all, working in a factory, you're often further out. It's not your local supermarket. You're going out to a warehouse. You're working unsociable hours, often first thing in the morning, round the clock often. A factory, it's loud, it's cold, it's dangerous. Often you're working outside. You're operating heavy machinery that is literally life and death. It's highly stressful. And that's not to say there aren't similar stresses in shop floors, but I don't think it's quite the same. You're working more often in daytime hours. You're often sat down, you're inside, you're not in a freezing cold warehouse, you're not wearing hard hats and steel cap boots and high-vis jackets all the time. It's just an easier job, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, and it shouldn't be paid the same as a factory worker. And ironically, there are women that work in the factory at Asda, and they're paid exactly the same as the men. And there's also men that work on the shop floor in Asda, and they're also paid the same as the women. So it's not about sexism, despite it being framed as a sexist discriminatory lawsuit. It's just the fact that fewer people want to work in the warehouse, so you have to compensate them with cash so they do those jobs. If you're going to pay them the same, then everyone at the warehouse is just going to be like, okay, I'll go and work on the shop floor then. And we see it in Birmingham City had the exact same thing a few years ago, where a bunch of Birmingham City Council employees successfully sued the council because people like teaching assistants were not getting paid the same as bin men. And I was like, well, I don't think they should be paid the same, because a bin man, I watch them every week, and it's like, I could not do that job. Freezing cold, first thing in the morning, literally throwing bags of trash around. Like, it's, again, loud, dangerous, cold. It's a really physically strenuous job. And that's not to say being a teaching assistant is easy, but it is physically easier and lower risk than being a bin man. And I don't think they should be paid the same. I don't think you would, if you could choose, I think you would choose to be a teaching assistant. And this is now at the centre of a massive legal fight. Next have gone in. They owe £30 million. They lost their lawsuit because the same thing, the people on the shop floor were getting paid less than the factory workers, and they wanted to be paid the same. And Next were like, this is where it gets really crazy. Next were like, okay, we will give you the chance to go and work in the warehouse, and we'll pay you the same as them. So you'll all get pay rise, go work in the warehouse. And the people on the shop floor were like, no, we don't want to work in the warehouse. It's too loud. It's too... And then they said they would work in the warehouse, but only if they got a pay rise. And it's like, that's the whole point. You figured it out. And it's like, the fact is, yeah, working the shop floor is easier, and you shouldn't get paid the same. And they know that, which is why they didn't take up Next's offer. So now Next owe them £30 million, and they're screwed as well.
Do you think it's the fact that we're just focusing on the headline rather than the nuance of the actual conversation?
I think most people just haven't worked in a factory. I put a post up on that yesterday, and had so many people who have worked in factories being like, working in a factory is so difficult. Like, you're literally doing things that could kill someone at any moment, all the time. And to have someone's life in your hands for the entire shift is so difficult. Of course, you're not working with customers, which on the shop floor you are, but overall, I think if we're honest, we would know that to work on the shop floor is preferable than to work in a factory. For loads of reasons.
The long-term physical implications of it as well. Like, if you've spent 10 years in a warehouse, it's going to have some detrimental effect to your physical health, like injuries, just repetitive injuries, strain injuries, things like that. And then there's costs that come with that, right?
It should just be a market thing. Like, you should pay factory workers whatever it costs to get people to do those jobs. That's how it works. Like,
have you ever delved into the conversation around sport and pay?
Yeah, well, I mean, the American team, USA, the women's football team, had exact same issue. That was outrageous. Remember that, when the American women's football team said they were getting paid less than the men, which they were, and then they successfully sued for millions. I think, maybe, I'm just off the top of my head, it was like $20-something million compensation to the women, and it's bullshit. It's the same thing. Like, the fact of the matter is, the women's and the men's team were both offered the same deal. The first deal was, you get paid to play. If you play, you get paid. That's the end of the story. The second one was, you do get paid to play, but you also get paid less, but you get bonuses. You get healthcare, you get dental, you get childcare leave, you get whatever insurance, you get bonuses for winning this, you get that, like a whole litany. And the women picked that one, and the men just wanted the cash. The men were like, just give us the cash. We don't want any of that, whatever medical stuff. And that was it. And ironically, the women would have won more, or would have got paid more, had they chose the first contract. And the men would have got paid more had they chose the second contract. And the lawyers, the judge, even offered the women the chance to change. And just like Next, they're like, okay, you can change. You can go, you can have the pay to play. You'll lose all of your benefits. No more healthcare, no more this, no more that, but you'll get the exact same money as the men. And they turned it down. They're like, no, we want both. We want both. And they got both, because they got a load more cash, and it's just outrageous, the lies and the bullshit. I forget about men's football bringing in more than women's football, which is also an important point. But the fact is, they made a choice. They made the wrong choice in many ways, but it's a choice they made. So live with it.
Was it sport in this conversation? I think the only people that truly understand the conversation are the ones that are actually in it. However, there are a few athletes that will try to bring their head above the parapet a little bit and try to be an outlier and gain attention through saying something that they kind of know is untrue as well. What I mean by this is ultimately sport is you are paid in sport dependent on how many people watch what you do. That's it. That is the pure equation. My brother used to work in Premier League football, and he used to get fan after fan going, "Cool, these footballers are paid far too much," with just another player being told what salary he's getting. And he said, "Yep, true, but the only way you can change that is if you turn off the TV. That's it." So that's how you change it. And so the flip is true. Like, you will get paid more if more people start watching it. And it was like, I had someone come into a WhatsApp group, bit outraged today, actually, because they just announced that in the Forbes top 100 athletes for earnings, there wasn't a single woman on there. And I could hear what they were saying. And they said, like, Coco Gauff, who had earned the most, I think it was at just over 37 million, she couldn't get into the 100th spot, which was 37.5 million. And I spoke to them and I said, well, is this not an issue of just attention? Like, this is just the attention. This is probably a conversation you're having around how much attention is being paid to women's sport. Those women will be paid more if more people watch it. Like, that's just literally the binary equation that happens. And I think the question that you want to be asking is, what was it comparative to 5 years ago? So what would Coco Gauff have earned compared to 5 years ago? And I've just come back from I've come back from the Australian Open, and Iga Swiatek, who has kind of been in the world of tennis at the very top for a few years now. Like, she's world number one, like, she has won Grand Slams, but she will be pretty high up on the world rankings of money earned. So she will have, but comparative to what Serena won, she's not there yet. But if Serena was around now with the money that's in tennis, like, it would just be astronomical. So she's going to earn a lot of money comparative to what could have been earned in years past. And I'm not saying this to still sort of shoot down, like, stop comparing men and women, but it's to say, actually, in this conversation, you should be comparing where women were to where they are now, and actually sort of celebrate that and say that's incredible. And again, if we want to keep moving that needle in the right direction, you're going to have more people watching women's sport, watching what's going on. And there is an argument saying, like, look, there will come a bit of a plateau in that, because, like, people in sport want to watch the freakiest thing. They want to watch the fastest, the biggest, the best, and like that. But also, men do have a system that has been around for a long, long time. It's been around for a lot longer. So there's balances that have to come with it. But ultimately, it comes down to sport is not, you're not paid on, not like what we're talking about, this supermarket gender pay gap, where it's effort in the job. Like, you are paid on the attention, right? I could equally argue, like, it's unfair that I trained all the hours I trained as a cricketer and I wasn't paid the same as a footballer. But I just have to know that not that many people watch cricket compared to football globally, and therefore the money doesn't follow me. It follows another sport where more people are interested.
And obviously,
simple as that.
You have to be a very elite cricketer to do what you've done, but I'd say you even have to be even more elite of a footballer. It's even more competitive. Like, we're talking like 1 in a million boys would be a professional footballer or something like that. To
get those astronomical...
there's only one Cristiano Ronaldo and only one Lionel Messi. And it's frustrating that, I think most men are willing to have a serious discussion about women's sport and women's football and how to pay women in these areas more, even subsidising them from the men's game like the women's NBA is by the men's NBA. I think most men are up for that. But the conversations I'm seeing happening, like Megan Rapinoe and women's football, and I think it's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous, embarrassing for women. They embarrass the profile of women's rights, in my opinion, and it makes men who are willing to have a sensible discussion just shutting off. And we're like, okay, then goodbye. And I remember another feminist I dated. She would always complain about women's football not getting paid enough. And I'm like, have you ever watched women's football though? Never watched it. No, it doesn't even like football. And I'm like, well, you've not been on a rainy day to Leicester City Football Club on a Sunday and watch them get smashed 3-0 by Swansea, have you? That's why men get paid more, because me and 30,000 other men mostly did do that. So why don't you turn the TV on and stop whining about it? And that pisses me off. It's a bit same one. She was punching the air, celebrating when James Bond became a black woman. So after Daniel Craig, they decided to cast the next James Bond or 007 as a black woman, Lashana Lynch. And she was celebrating, yes, it's great for women. And I was like, have you ever watched James Bond? She's like, no, I hate James Bond. And I was like, fuck's sake. Like, these are not serious people. It's embarrassing. And they harm women's rights. They make women's rights look silly. And these are not serious discussions. And I would love to have a serious discussion about how do we sensibly subsidise women's football and sports, whilst also acknowledging the tremendous growth women have made, mostly by themselves, like carving out a space within sports, winning some trophies, unlike the men. And they're not being properly served either, because we're not having these serious discussions. So,
well, I know a CEO of a women's Premier League football club, and I asked him, like, can you give me a reality of like sort of what it costs, or sort of just money that's sort of thrown around? He said, well, to give you a bit of an indication, that you had the men's World Cup was a $1 billion generating event, like generates $1 billion. Like, and that was the final. Sorry, just the final. And he said the women's World Cup final will generate 10 million. So like that's the landscape. So that's what you deal with. So that's where you're playing from. So he said we have players that come in that want to be paid the same and paid upwards of towards what the men are being paid, but the men's game currently has to subsidise it now because it's a Premier League club. They have a men's team that can subsidise it, so they fall within the umbrella. But there's other clubs that won't have that, so there'll be other clubs that don't have that luxury because the men's club actually isn't as big a money generator as the other Premier League clubs that are in there, so like the top 10 clubs, right? So it's forever going to be that will have to subsidise it until you just fill Wembley continuously, or you fill every stadium with the amount of football fans that can then say this has got the attention that equals men.
Let's turn the TV on, show advertisers one more viewers arrived. That all adds up, and at the end of the year, they're like, oh, more people are viewing women's football. Let's give these women more money. And the thing is, women's football is actually really good. It's not even like, it's definitely not better than it was, and it's actually great. It's actually a different type of sport to the men's football, and I do watch it, and I enjoy watching it. And I think just a matter of time before it's never going to be as big as the men's football. You're never going to get women getting paid £250,000 every week like some of the Premier League footballers are. But they should certainly get paid a lot more than they are currently. But then again, I'm not going to play a violin for these women that are, wealthier than either of us. So I'm not that bothered by them.
On that note, what is this FINDOM that you put up recently?
Yeah, okay, another left turn. FINDOM stands for Financial Domination. And as described, it's basically where one person, a dom, typically a woman, dominates a sub, typically a man, through controlling his finances. So you would be what's called a pay pig, a sub, and you give money to the woman, let's say that's me, and you pay them thousands of pounds potentially over weeks or less than that. And that's how it works. And she humiliates you. She says, thanks, Lewis, you piece of shit. I fucking hate you, you loser. Give me some more cash. And you're like, here you go, here's another £100. Thank you, fuck you. That's called FINDOM. And it's such an interesting discussion. The source of many arguments between my girlfriend and I, if I'm honest. And what is FINDOM? Like, is it a kink, or is that just an excuse to financially abuse someone? Because the definition of FINDOM and the definition of financial abuse are literally the same, and that is controlling someone through their finances. That's what FINDOM is, that's what financial abuse is. So very difficult to delineate what is abuse and what is potentially a therapeutic kink for men. So I've been asking, how do we know if these men are consenting as adults of their own free will to be financially dominated, which is their right? I don't care what you do. I mean, I'm pro-choice for more or less anything. I'm pro-sex work. Do what you want. But which of those men are just not mentally well? Which of those men are actually formally victims of financial abuse or just abuse generally, that are having their trauma, being re-traumatized and having their mental health issues sort of emboldened by these actions? And it really, for me, it comes down to where is the safeguarding? And often the people that are doing these FINDOMs, they're just a bunch of like young women, young good-looking women on shopping sprees on TikTok, and they've got no interest in the well-being of their clients. They're not running themselves. They're not running their service as a legitimate business. There is no safeguarding. There is no oversight. There is no regulation or transparency. It's just them getting their bag. And in that case, I think that's it. That is unethical, and that can be abuse. But again, there are people, dominatrixes, that seem to run these relationships in a professional way with safeguarding and transparency. And I'm like, oh, in that case, you're free to do that. You're free to use the services. But where's the line? When does something stop being a kink or a fetish and start being actually abusive? Where is that line?
It's under the guise of it, isn't it? It's just used as a bit of a smokescreen. What have you made of the Lily Phillips, Bonnie Blue world and scandals that are going on?
Just whatever. It's not for me. I'm not gonna on the receiving or giving end of that. I'm not interested. But she is an adult. She seemed to make that choice by her own free will. She got paid handsomely for it. And as far as I can tell, that's as far as it goes. She can do whatever she wants with her body. Like, what happened to my body, my choice? I don't agree with what she did. I don't think it's good for her health. But she's also an adult. I don't know enough about her mental health to know, did she actually consent to that? But it seems like she did. But I do find it interesting how everyone's judging the whole thing. And the men, the men are painted as monsters by most people, but no one ever talks about them, like the men who had mental breakdowns afterwards or were forced into it. Like, just bring your friends, doesn't matter. No STI checks, often not even checking their age. Just wheel them in. And where is the safeguarding for that? I didn't see much of it for Lily or the men. It just seemed like a complete shit show.
I've been very sort of it's been encouraging to see the amount of women that stood up for a lot of men in that situation, because I think it was more Bonnie Blue that was the one that was trying to brag about taking virginities. And that for me was when I thought, okay, how much of this is consensual, like, and how much of this is just kind of coercing these young boys into something, wrapping it around the guise of fame and popularity, which is at a teenager's age or a young boy's age, like, it's the one thing you want to try and do in life is try and fit in somewhere and feel like you've got status.
And also we tell men, especially young men, every day more or less, that you should have sex, you want sex, you are judged by having sex. To have sex with a woman is a gift. So when these opportunities arrive, a lot of these men and boys are being sort of marinating in these gender stereotypes that they should want to have sex with her, so therefore I will. And in that situation, it's like, how much of that is their free will and how much of it is them just acting out their own sort of stereotypes. But like I said, nothing I've seen from Lily Phillips has crossed that line, so I guess I support it despite disagreeing. As for Bonnie Blue, she's a bit more difficult, isn't it? I mean, she was targeting young men. I think she went to like some Freshers Week and was saying, I want to have sex with whatever. And they're like, you don't, these like 18-year-old teenagers. And I think she got banned from Australia. And I think that's great. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Mate, it's been amazing having you on. What's sort of something that you're really targeting at the moment that you sort of want to be talking about over the next sort of few weeks that is sort of in your crosshairs?
I'm petitioning the Human Rights and Equality Council to change prison policy reform in the UK, recently brought in by the Labour government, which is totally spinning my head. I don't understand it whatsoever. Maybe you can make some sense of it for me. But there's a man who's been a long-time hero of mine for ages, called James Timpson. He runs a company called Timpson in the UK. You might know him for like cutting your keys or fixing your shoes and that sort of thing. But the way it's unlike other companies, that Timpson hires a lot of ex-convicts. So I think maybe 1,500 to 2,000 of their employees are from prison. And the amount of men that have reoffended, you can count on one hand. It's like the tiniest percent of recidivism. And you're basically giving these men training, opportunities, healthcare, therapeutic support to leave prison behind, not go back and have gainful employment and a career. And I was like, what a wonderful, that like melts my heart. That for me is the solution to the prison crisis. Not one of punishment, but of rehabilitation and second chances. Not for everyone. Timpson, for example, he doesn't give sex offenders jobs. He'll only give it for like non-violent crimes. So there are certain safeguards, as there should be. But Timpson, 6 months ago, James Timpson, he was made the UK Minister of Prisons. So the man at the top of the mountain, the man who can change the prison system in the way that I wanted it, and he's been put in that position. I'm like, finally, we're going to actually empty these prisons in the UK of so many of the men and women that shouldn't be there, not being helped. Let's start doing it. So I was like whooping and clapping and did posts all about him. And then he came out with the reform, as I thought he would, in the exact way that I'd hoped, apart from one way, that he's only doing it for women in prison. So he wants to reform prison, he wants to give vocational training, he wants to give brain scans for people with traumatic head injuries, he wants to look at experiences of abuse and addiction, self-harm in prisons, but only for women in prisons, which blows my mind considering 96% of prisoners in the UK are men, and there's a huge percentage of those men that would benefit from those exact same things in the very way that Timpson showed the world, pioneered in many ways. And I can't understand what blows my mind, how you'd write this life-saving policy and then the next swish of your pen exclude 96% of the prison population from said policy. So yeah, the latest birdcage I'm rattling is the Human Rights Commission. And I've got quite a number of my followers are also rattling that birdcage. I've disseminated an open letter that people can send to their local MPs, and there's like the CEO of the to the CEO of the Equality and the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who's being bombarded, I'm sure. And I want that policy changed. I want that policy distributed on the basis of need, not gender. On the basis of need, of which there's a huge need in the male prison population too. Like there are so many men that should not be in prison. So many men have been, like we talked about gangs, so many young men that are coerced to gangs, literal modern slaves, and they're in prison. They should not be in prison. Get them out of prison. Give them these vocational trainings. There's so many men that have been abused that are in prison because they're traumatized. Get them out. Men are addicted to drugs. Get them out of prison. And so on and so, like men. One of the things that Timpson said is there was a lot of women in prison who are mothers, and fair enough. Let's try to get them out. But there's even more fathers as a percentage and in absolute numbers. So it's not that I disagree with what Timpson's saying. I agree wholeheartedly. It's not that it's gone too far. It's not gone far enough, in my view. So let's roll that out to everyone on the basis of need of both sexes, including women and men. So that is one of the many flags I'm putting in the ground. And I genuinely want to see, can I actually affect policy on a nationwide scale this year? So check back in 12 months and we'll see how successful said birdcage rattling has been.
Do you think Labour did that to sort of not conveniently, but to satisfy a headline of it being looking like they're doing the right thing?
Well, most people that vote are women, especially on the left, and especially for Labour. Labour are just looking for more women's votes. So they're just doing politics. That's what politics is. I don't think politicians give a shit about anything. They just want your vote. And if closing women's prisons down will get Labour more votes from women, then that's what they'll do. So it's interesting how James, when he was in the private sector, he did what was right and made most business sense, which was giving these opportunities to women and men. But as soon as he enters politics, suddenly it's just for women, and he's doing the whole virtue signalling, identity politics nonsense that has defined Labour, and will probably spell the end of Labour if they continue doing this ridiculous politicking, you call it, woke nonsense. So he's very much become a politician immediately, and forgotten his legacy of helping men in prison.
What would be your advice to someone who would like to better start supporting men's issues, but not sort of fall into the worry of getting shot down for having to do it or wanting to do it?
The thing is, the more people that are worried about that, the more likely it is to happen. By acting ashamed or quietening your voice, I feel like you're only reinforcing the fact that you should quieten your voice and you should be ashamed and you should be afraid. What you're doing is absolutely shameful, but it's not shameful. They're not men's rights, they're human rights, and we're all entitled to them. So I would say easier said than done. I mean, I'm using a pseudonym, so I didn't do it myself, but I would say there was nothing to be apologetic for. And there's no need to quieten your voice. There's no need to feel shame. And as someone that's had their head clearly above that parapet for nearly 5 years now, it's really not that bad. Now you'll get a few people throwing tin cans at you, but most of all, you'll be inundated with messages of thanks and support and kindness and understanding. And there are far, far, far more people that will support you and thank you than it will, call you silly names. And it's like literally like, if I had to line up 100 messages I get, 95 of them will be of support, and the rest will be, as you described, maybe not even that, maybe less than that. It's really not that bad.
I think that was a lot of what you saw publicly with Jordan Peterson when he first started, and he was really rattling the tin can for men and putting out a lot of stuff there. He would get a lot of blowback, but then you would only listen to his interviews and he would say, it's mostly positive. I go to these locations and men are coming up to me. And I think that actually then comes back to people being worried about getting worried about saying what it is that they really, really feel through this idea of being cancelled and actually being shot down. But it's probably not actually anywhere near as the fear of that is far greater than the actual experience of that happening.
I think it's massively over-exaggerated, and in the same way that his audience is also mischaracterized too. People seem to think that he's only followed by white incel alt-right men, straight men like that. I got invited as a guest to one of his talks last year. It's a physical talk, and I was like, right, I actually get to look around at what is the demographic makeup of a Jordan Peterson fan. Turn around, you must see, and it's everyone, like loads of women, loads of men, various people of different ethnic backgrounds. Difficult to know which of them are gay or not, but I'm sure plenty of gays there as well. And it was just like a very diverse group of people, very well-meaning people, thoughtful people, not Tommy Robinson fans and stuff like that. And same, whenever I go to events, whenever I have the occasional meetup for the Tin Men, I'm always so honoured and inspired and privileged to see how normal and amazing so many of my followers are. They're not, I think, oh, they're all going to be, this and that. They're not. They're amazing. They're like, the last person I met, she's like an American, and she's like a Harvard graduate studying aeronautic engineering. And I was like, what an amazing fact. That's just totally normal. So it's not as you think. It's much better than you're probably told, and it's really not that bad up here. So give it a go. And
what's the best way for us to support you? How can we best support you right now and what you're doing?
Just follow the Tin Men. I mean, there's always campaigns I'm trying to do. I'm always trying to raise money for various organisations, never for myself. I'm trying to help men's abuse shelter get off the ground in Wales right now, called Jonathan's House. So for £1,000, you can basically furnish for life one of his rooms, and you can basically give the man in that room safeguarding and therapeutic support for a year. So I'm trying to get people to do that. But yeah, follow me at the Tin Men on Instagram. I'm on YouTube now, the Tin Men blog, and also on X for the time being, although X is a shit show. Also the Tin Men blog, but Instagram is the main point of call.
For sure. I can't recommend it enough. I was saying that as an athlete, I used to sort of revere other athletes and look up to people and really get sort of inspired by being around them. But while that has now definitely moved on, it's people like you, the work that you're doing, and there's no doubt that a lot of what you've done, listening to you talk and even just having you on today, but a lot of your posts have gone a long way for helping me figure out my position on a lot of things and my own thinking, clarify that, and also make conversations that I'm able to have with both genders, both men and women, much, much clearer, much better. And it's down to the work that you're doing. And I have nothing but admiration and support for what you're doing, mate. I think it's unreal.
Well, thank you. And you asked me how can you support the cause, and you've just described it, like exactly what you've just done. Like well-meaning following, listening, communicating, doing what you've already done. So I appreciate that, and I will take the compliment, as difficult as it is. And thank you. It's lovely to meet you, and we should do it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, George, really appreciate it.
See you later.
If you enjoyed that episode with George and you want to join even more episodes of the show, I've put together a playlist where you can get started right away of some of the best hand-picked episodes. All you got to do is head right here.